The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome to the show. We've got myself, Steven Skash. We've got Ashmar and Tulio Siragusa. Today, we're going to dive into the importance of moving beyond small talk. At work, don't be the traffic report guy at the water cooler. And those Zoom meetings, don't be the weather enthusiast we all are. Those first couple minutes where people are gathering for those meetings, those can be the most valuable time you spend if you do it right. So really, though, this topic is important for everyone. Pretty much, unless you're in solitary confinement, this is going to impact you. So at work, you've got colleagues, you may have clients or customers, or in a sales role, maybe you've got those potential customers. You interact with people on a daily basis at, the cash register, or just going about your daily routine, and maybe you even struggle with just building stronger relationships in general. So in a world that is increasingly disconnected, this is a skill that really needs to be learned. So maybe you've heard this quote before. It's people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So this quote is often attributed to Maya Angelou, but it actually had been around prior to her saying that, which pretty much makes the point in itself. She probably just said it better, I guess. So Ash, how true is what's being said there?
It's funny. This is a tough pill I had to swallow in high school. Luckily, it was at an earlier age that I learned this, because it totally catapulted me in terms of socially and professionally. But it's gut wrenching to know that the way you may have made someone feel, they hold those perceptions to you long after you probably have evolved from being that person that you once were. So today, it's the same scenario where I see that no matter what you do for people, they will never forget how you made them truly feel. And I think we had this conversation last week about grievances in the workplace. I think that plays a part in that situation as well, that, how you make someone feel, those feelings start to fester up, and sometimes problems tend to arise. But yeah, it's when you realize everything's about connection, then you really don't have to do a whole lot for people. Make everyone just feel really good. So that's
yeah. Are you going to make people feel like you don't care? Are you going to make them feel small or unimportant? Or are you making people feel like they're human, like they matter? And so, Tulio, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it goes a little beyond just the feeling, because feelings can be fleeting, right? But experiences are memorable. So it's really the kind of experience that you can create, good or bad. And we do remember good or bad experiences. That's what we remember. And we may not remember exactly how we felt, but we remember that it was either a good or a bad experience. So it really comes down to what kind of experience are we enabling? Small talk, not really experiencing anything other than just wasting time, right?
Yeah. No, you're not. I think that you make a great point about experience. So why does this matter from a business standpoint? So I've got some stats for you heartless folks out there that need the data and just, can't realize beyond that this is a good thing to be as a human. So why is this important? So let me just read through a few of these. So one study showed that a deeper connection with your customers led to more than double their purchases and tripled their referrals. Another study, connections at a personal human level can drive up to a 20% increase in sales over more transactional relationships. And I keep that word transactional in mind. I mean, that's one of the huge differences here, especially when you're trying to make connections. Another survey found 96% of customers were more loyal and more likely to purchase when they believed companies invested personal intention into an effort into understanding their unique needs. And then this last stat here, another study reported that 60% of customers stopped doing business with a company due to the feelings that they were just another transaction than valued in a personal way. So high performance sales organizations, they build more authentic relationships. And I think that's really key here. So So Ash, how's the weather where you're at today?
Weather's nice. It was a little gloomy yesterday, but a little brighter today. But what
That's
right?
that's amazing. That's
What was the connection in that question? The weather's amazing.
Nap time.
No, I could ask you that. I could ask you that, or I could say, hey, Tulio and Ash, if you could transport any in the world right now to eat at one restaurant, where would you go? Tulio.
Oh, now I'm remembering an experience. It would have to be Campagnola's on the Upper East Side of New York. I remember one evening having the best ossobuco I've had in my life, while Chas Palminteri, yes, the Chas Palminteri, was playing the piano and everybody was singing. It was like a scene, and that was an extraordinarily memorable experience. And I don't know if it was the ossobuco, or if it was the atmosphere, or the whole thing. All I remember is that was an amazing experience, and that's where I want to go to immediately when you ask, what's your favorite place to go eat?
Say that? Go back in time and space. Ash, what about you?
Mine has to be Japan. There's a restaurant called Suki Yabashi Gyro. It's earned 3-star Michelin every year that it's been in business. But the interesting part about this restaurant is that it's underneath a subway station. And I discovered it on a Netflix special where they documented this older gentleman who does the same thing every single day. So his consistency has led to his mastery, and he's able to have a business where people connect to his food and will wait months in reservation. He only maybe serves 4 people at a time, but they're going into a subway station to eat probably the best sushi in the world. So that would be my place of transportation, would be to be in that spot and just see that level of excellence and enjoy that amazing sushi.
That's great. So for me, I'd say Shakespeare's Pizza, Columbia, Missouri. I mean, so good, but my son also lives there, and that means I'd be having a meal with him. So yeah, that'd give it a little extra significance to me. So let's just stop for a second. We all just kind of went through some of that, and for us, a lot of that was just we're talking about those experiences for sure. But we've all learned a little something about each of us, right? So something about me, I've got a son. He lives in the middle of the country. I miss him. I like good pizza. For, the other people on the call, they might take note of, that discussion, and they could dig in a little bit, So for Ash and Tulio, this allows you to be maybe a little curious. You could dig deeper and ask questions that kind of evoke, emotions or feelings, which is really sometimes where you might want to get to in a conversation. So Tulio might be asking, oh, how old's your son? What did he do to get himself, out there in Missouri compared to where you're at in California? And I could give you a whole discussion on that. I might talk about, this where he went to college and dropping him off for the first time, a few years back. Was really one of the worst days of my life because I knew the next couple of weeks were just going to be miserable for him. So you can see kind of how you can kind of just do a little digging in there, just having a little curiosity just about someone or the threads that they put into the answer, right? I mean, that's really kind of a key is providing someone with, this threaded conversation that they could pick up on if they want to, or so when you're giving an answer, or picking up on those threads that someone else may have just left there. So dig in, be a little curious. It's like rather than, we went from nibbling that stale bread of the weather conversation to now biting into just like the juiciest, your favorite fruit, right? It's just a lot different compared to where we were at the start of that. So Tulio,
but also giving more context when you answer, because if you had just said pizza in Missouri without giving context to your son there, the first thing I would have been like, I've had pizza all over the world. There's good pizza in Missouri? Yeah. Am I missing something? No, but the fact that you mentioned your son, like, oh, I get why the pizza tastes even better in Missouri. So it's even how we answer that can trigger different experiences and feeling. And Ash was like, a place in the subway. I was like, yeah, some of the best meals I've had is like a hole in the wall. It doesn't have to be this fancy place with Chas playing the piano. So you can transcend and trigger memories for people, which creates a better experience.
And just to quickly piggyback on that too, when you initially asked the first question, how's the weather? What response did you get from me that was of any value or of any deeper understanding of my personality other than great? It was great. Yeah. But whereas, right, exactly. Where, the questions regarding, understand that you are a family. Like, you answered your question about pizza, but then you brought up that your son's in that area and you get to see him. Well, that just brought to light that you are a family man, that you value family values. Right there, we just spur into a whole rabbit hole of positive conversation to get to know each other a little bit better versus the weather question, which was this is good. So I thought that's very interesting to think about. The different angles of conversations that you could lead into deeper understanding of individuals.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the easy things too, is ask something, about someone's favorite things, right? Hey, I'm interested in doing this, or I'm in the area. What would you recommend? There's a lot of different ways you could just sort of get into that just by asking someone what some of their favorite of this category is. And everyone else on the conversation is going to be interested in hearing it too, just because, we're all looking for that kind of information, that personal reference stuff. So Tulio, in my answer, I was a little bit vulnerable and, talking about missing someone. And, I even shared like one of my most painful days. So what's the importance of showing that vulnerability yourself?
Well, that's the key to connection, really, because when you are vulnerable, you actually create a safe space for everyone else to step into that. And that creates intimacy. If I'm able to open up about something that's delicate, or there's emotions that I relate to it, then I give you permission to do the same. And then we can have really heart-to-heart, blissful type of conversations that are meaningful, that create connection between us, that bind us together instead of just having empty conversations. So, when you're vulnerable, you really create an environment for intimacy. And actually, the one who's most vulnerable shows up the most powerful, because you are leading the conversation down a path of authenticity, of being real, of actually, removing the walls, of taking off the masks, and being able to have genuine, authentic connection. So the vulnerable one gives license to everybody else, which makes that person not the weak one, but the most powerful in the room.
Yeah. And I think, you touched on that authenticity. That's what we want here. I've given you the stats and the data or whatever, and we'll give you some techniques or tips, but really the goal is just to be more authentic, right? You can't, if you're faking this, forget about it. But also what Tulio said about vulnerability, recognize when someone's being vulnerable too, and, don't show judgment, or don't, there's a lot of ways you can go sideways with that if you're not kind, empathize, share something with them. Tulio, you wrote something that I want to quote because I thought it was really beautiful. It's on your site. It said, when you're vulnerable, you give permission to others for authentic relationships built on trust and mutual respect. That's when life really flourishes and we begin to experience bliss on a regular basis. That's when we break free of self-imposed ideas about ourselves that are not rooted in self-love. I thought that was beautiful. And it's right on the point, what you're talking about. So vulnerability, authenticity is key. Ash, when you work, you're in a client-facing role right now as kind of a marketing advisor. How does moving beyond that small talk with clients help you?
It helps me literally cut through the fog. I think the expectation, and it's been a meme that's been created about this conversation, is that the first question I'm going to ask him is, where are you calling me from? Or to the first question, oh, how's the weather down there? Right? Where I'm not really building any real connection that will allow me to cut through what I need to analyze in order to come up with solutions and strategies that are helpful to the business and the goals we're trying to accomplish together. So when I'm able to cut through that fog and build that genuine connection and show that I'm human, just like you, and I care about you, and I want your well-being, and they can sense that, right? And going back to vulnerability as well, when they see my vulnerability, the honesty behind the strategy being deployed, and being completely upfront and honest in my correspondence with that person, it will allows us to create an environment of collaboration where they actually feel like they're a part of the marketing process. And that's beautiful there, because we come up with solutions, strategies that I myself, without the collaboration of the business owner or small business owners I work with, would not have been able to we wouldn't have been able to get there without being able to create an environment of that open collaboration. And honestly, at the end of the day, I've discovered with a lot of my clients that a lot of people really enjoy working with their friends. And when you're able to create an environment where they feel they're actually working with their friend, then it's like a guarantee into their minds that this person does truly have their best interest, because friends typically have their best interest for each other, right? So that's kind of my experience, and the results have spoken for themselves. You take a relationship where someone sees you as a service provider versus an actual partner, and the results are apples to oranges, because there's just no way you're able to get to the truth of what you need to do for your business without being collaborative and being vulnerable.
Yeah. And in your position, you're in the trenches together with them, right? You want them, you feel it. If their business isn't doing well, you're not sleeping well at night. And I think a lot of businesses struggle to express that. It's something that like we purposely focus on, is trying to build those authentic connections, just because it's like sometimes things will go a little sideways. And if you've got that relationship of trust as an advisor, they'll be like, yeah, but I know Ash is going to get this back, and Ash is going to, work as hard as he can. So you get a little bit of leeway too for that, right?
Well, that's a great point. And it's weathering the storm together, right? Because the ebb and flows of the market, there are things that happen in campaign strategies. And as we've learned, what works yesterday may not work today, or what works today may not work tomorrow. And knowing that you're going through this little wave of ebb and flow, you want to be able to trust the person that you're with. And when you have that connection with them, to your point, Steve, it's like when things aren't going so great, you trust that Ash or whoever is doing their best to solve that problem. And you feel that confidence when there's that connection there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's also some principles in NLP that speaks to helping people envision an experience. And even in speaking, I did this course and I was blown away. Someone did a speech. It was like an hour and a half and it felt like 15 minutes. How does an hour and a half speech feel like just 15 minutes? Because it was that good. And this guy was masterful at creating an experience for the audience where you can envision yourself somewhere, you can experience something. And so this idea of being somewhere in the future, or fantasizing being somewhere, would keep the audience so engaged that they lost track of time. They literally lost track of time. So I think the small talk doesn't do that. It just it keeps you present in the moment. It doesn't add any value whatsoever, and sometimes just actually reminds you why you may not be in a good mood. So, I think part of, especially if you're a leader, part of a leader's job is to remove friction points for people, and to just what you ask and how you position it can help someone step into a different mindset, a different perspective, a completely different context that can open them up to be having a conversation that might be a difficult conversation or not. So it's really that important to make sure we're seasoning our words with salt, because you want to create a flavor for the conversation you're going to have. And what's the weather like and how do you feel? That doesn't add any flavor whatsoever.
Yeah, to that point, Tulio, like Dale Carnegie in the How to Win Friends and Influence People talks about, don't make the conversation about yourself. I mean, but that doesn't mean you don't like lead by telling them a little bit about yourself, or, like you said, seasoning that conversation. Doesn't mean, don't get vulnerable, but you definitely just want to be really cognizant that you're just not, dominating this conversation, and it's all about you. And, you want to hear other people's opinions. You want to let them know that their opinions matter by being a really good listener. So there are ways you can kind of lead the conversation, having someone else talk, right? Just by, like you said, adding a little salt or whatever, or threading that conversation a little bit. And, just being present, being an active listener after that, and moving the conversation along more skillfully as a result. So what's the worst business related sort of small talk for you guys? Like, for me, I think I just get the shivers thinking about networking sometimes. It can just be so, it's just such an awkward thing. And sometimes it takes that, complete extrovert to really kind of own those situations. But I think, very few people are really, truly comfortable in that. Honestly, there's probably a whole podcast we could do just on networking. But quickly, Tulio, like what kind of tips do we have for that sort of scenario? Anything come to mind for you?
Well, I can talk about what has made me uncomfortable, and I'm assuming it probably does other people as well. Like sometimes there's the common thread of talking about some sport event that happened, or hey, how about those guys? How about that team, right? And it's assuming that everybody's watching sports. I'm not a big sports follower. I love playing sports, but I don't follow it on TV. So I always felt a little like I don't know how to answer what you just asked or what you made a comment on because I'm disconnected from that. So you're trying to make connection, but you actually end up creating disconnection because you don't really know if that person is into it or not. So what I've discovered is if it's something personal, vulnerable, human, like not some external thing going on, whether it's the weather or the game or what have you, then someone will relate to it personally, however it relates to them. So I tend to focus more on things like, what would make your day better today? And it's like, oh, that's an interesting question. So, are you having a good day? What would make it better today? Right? It's not just, are you having a good day? Yes or no. It's like, what would make it better? Forcing someone to think, what could make this better? And they could say, no, actually, it's going great. That's awesome. Is that like that for you every day? Oh, no. So you can go a little bit more, right? Even if it's a form of small talk, it has some intentionality, which is to create connection. So I try to think about how can I create connection, not just let the next 2 minutes go by.
Yeah, I think you got those different icebreakers you can have in your mind. And even simply just walking up to someone and saying, hey, I don't think I met you yet. I'm Steven. I mean, there's that, just something simple like that, kind of like, oh yeah, we're supposed to do this, right? So this is what we're doing. And then you can get through that first initial awkward phase, but then, what do you do from there? Like you said, sports is really, it's like the weather, it's like the traffic too. It's like so you're just something that's sort of this universal thing that people just gravitate to because it's easy. If you have, I think, some kind of mission, like while you're there, like, and it doesn't even have to be, it can be just something personal. Like, hey, I just finished a new book and I'm looking to buy a new one. You guys got any recommendations on what I should read next? I just read blah, blah, blah. I mean, something like that, where it's, again, going back to that favorites thing or recommendations type of thing, where you just sort of set this mission in your mind, like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get this, this, and this, if nothing else out of this meeting, or this networking event. But it also flows into that sort of natural conversation thing. Ash, did you have any comments on the horrible ordeal of networking, or if you
the moment you brought this topic up, I had to absolutely agree. This is the worst business related small talk experience, right? And it's funny. I think my only angle is this. And before I even begin, like, you have to imagine how challenging networking could be for most people. You want to be polite and not rude, formal but not nice. But nice, I apologize. Clear but interesting. And you can only imagine how stressful that could be, right? So the good news about networking, though, it's really just based in human connection. We like people more when we feel connected to them. So previously we were talking about where yourself comes into this conversation. Sure, you don't want to go into a conversation with someone new and just talk about yourself. But where yourself really does come into play is that it's really hard to connect with what is called a stilted mess, right? Someone who's all over the place, clearly have agendas, but they don't really know what their agenda is. And they really just want to talk about themselves, but their self looks like a complete disaster. So take a second, and this is my student, take a second and take stock of you. What do you like about yourself? Is it your sense of humor? Is it your smile? Is it your ability to make witty comments? Is it your listening skills? Write down a few of these things that you like. And then the next time you reach out to someone, put that list metaphorically in front and center. If you are funny, feel free to be a little funny in your emails or your correspondence, or in this case, in your networking experience. If you're charming, be charming. If you have a smile that everyone's mentioned they love, show off that smile. But really, it's not about talking about specific line items. You're not talking about sports or things that you think you're interested in, but really just bringing yourself into conversation. And like Steve mentioned, it could be as simple as a topic about you read a book, and sprinkling your humor in the way you communicate with people. When people feel that you're a genuine and authentic individual with how you are perceiving in terms of how you're making them feel in the conversation, then you tend to have a really easy, genuine connection and a very genuine conversation and a great networking experience.
Yeah, I like that idea of real quick, Tulio. I like that idea of having that list about yourself, what you like about it, because I think most people have the opposite list. Like, what do I want to improve on? What do I want to get better? And you're just kind of pounding it all day. And not to mention advertisers telling you what you need to improve on and all that stuff. Tulio,
exactly.
What were you about to say?
Yeah, I was just this just reminded me too, it really helps to do this even with your own children. And like one of the questions I've learned to ask is, did you learn something new today? What challenged you today? Where did you push yourself that you felt scared? And, or did you have an opportunity to fail? And what did you learn from that? So it's more meaningful than just, how did your day go? Did you go good? Okay, that's good. So even the small talk, you can practice even amongst your family and friends too. So go deeper, get interested in triggering them to think about their day or how it impacted them and what they learned from it or what they wish they had learned from it. It opens up so much more to have meaningful conversations. So I tend to really like when someone helps me envision something that I haven't thought about. It challenges me to use my creative thinking, to imagine, to fantasize, to go into this potential, and it works really well when someone does that for me. And I've tried that with others too, and it seems to work very well too. Sometimes I don't. I fall into the small talk too, but the minute I do, I'm like I shifted into something either funny or meaningful.
I have to agree with Tulio too. Just to say that, the question might sound open-ended. What challenged you today? But when we're having that conversation, if I were to ask the same question and sprinkle in my own version of how I'd say, oh, well, what challenged you today? Today, I ran into something that was challenging for me. And this is blah, 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 blah. This happened, right? And I had some sprinkle of humor. Now I'm giving someone a reference point to be like, oh, okay, well, I had something similar happen to me. Or, oh, this was my version of what was challenging for me. You're kind of continuing that conversation when you're, again, bringing vulnerability into that open-ended, very powerful question.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those questions. Are there any others that come to mind for you guys? What's exciting at work these days, right? That kind of thing that you could just ask to someone. I know I've been in, the middle of Ubers and stuff. And one of the things I'll just say, who's the craziest person you've ever had, as a passenger, and you get some wild stories and you just start things off that. And you could ask that question literally in any job you come across. What's the craziest thing that you've ever had, blah, blah, blah. And people will be like, oh man. And they'll go into some story. And it's usually pretty fascinating too, as well. So you guys, Tulio, what comes to mind on some other questions that maybe you think of?
I mean, like, what do you enjoy about your job? Is there something new you're learning that's challenging you? What have you, what are you working on right now that's exciting? What are you working on right now that scares you to death? It could be anything that's related to a real question that makes the person relate to you in a real way. But my favorite is always like, what do you love about your job? What would you like to make? What would you like to change about it? Or, what do you love about the people you work with? What do you not like about the people you work with?
That question about the job. So way back when I used to be a reporter, and I remember this one person who was just, I could not crack, right? It was always just this stone-faced thing. And then finally, just one day I went in there and I just asked him, hey, so what do you really like about this job? What's blah, blah. And they just went off, and I was like, oh, finally I broke through to this person, because people do like talking about their job. I was probably 18, 19 at the time, just trying to learn and figure out some of these techniques. Ash, some questions that come to mind for you when you're just trying to get a little deeper.
Yeah, no, it's scenario basis. So let's just say hypothetically, I'm at a networking event and I'm meeting people for the first time, and no one knows who I am. I think I'm just gonna go, hey, hi, I'm Ash. I'm not gonna start with the small talk, but I'll take possibly someone's opinion on a subject, right? Not a specific. It could be something very specific to the event. Hey, where is this location of this thing, and what were your thoughts on that event that you just went to, or that speech that we just listened to? And what were your thoughts on so and so up on stage? Getting their opinion and kind of hearing their feedback, and then it kind of dives into different conversations, right? But then when someone actually knows who you are, or maybe you're segueing now into something that kind of gets a little bit more informal. For me, I really like asking the question, what do you guys do for fun? What do you actually enjoy doing outside of work? What's your fun? Because people come to these events and sure, they have goals they're trying to accomplish, but sometimes pulling yourself outside of the work life and thinking about things that bring you joy and speak to that inner child, and just be able to talk about that and realize that, all this is great, but not all of this is that big of a deal either, and be able to lighten up the mood. I think in those type of experiences, you're able to build a connection with people where you're talking about fun things, but then the opportunity of possibly working together comes to rise. But
I think that, that question even works at the beginning of the Zoom meeting. There's a couple of you just sitting around and you're kind of waiting. You're just like, hey, Ash, what do you like to do for fun? And it's kind of an expected conversation thing too. And it's, you end up getting to know more about that person. And from, a client standpoint for us, the more we can know about that person, the more we can relate to them, which is, is really kind of the key. So I think when you're talking about stuff like that, it's good to just share things that kind of elicit the emotional response, right? Fun, happy, sad, share something yourself that makes you, what your dreams are, what your regrets or aspirations, or, what you're embarrassed about. Ash is really good about doing that sometimes, and but it's like, it definitely helps with, the vulnerability, but, getting those emotional responses, I think, is really where that sort of bonding starts kicking in a little bit.
And I think what's easiest, it's a very open-ended, maybe a tougher question to ask somebody, what are you passionate about, right? Because now that's sit there and think about, well, what am I actually passionate about? When you're able to make the conversation a little bit easier, and you make it, what do you actually enjoy doing? What do you do for fun? I think the passions come out, right? Then they indirectly start to tell you what they're passionate about, and then you deeply get to understand who that person is at a deeper level.
So let's kind of recap here real quick. So we've got, be authentic. That's really the purpose out of all this, and it's just, much better way to live in general. But so be authentic. Make sure that's first and foremost. Search for those connections. Be curious, right? The little phrase, tell me more, that little concept, just keeping that in mind can get you a long way. Ask about favorites was another one. Be vulnerable. Thread your conversation, like we talked about at the beginning. You're putting stuff in there that people can pick up on. And if you can, share something emotional in the middle of that too. Zero in on feelings, right, about certain things. I think that's where the real connection can be made. And then also thank people when they're vulnerable, or they shared something, or like, something that touched you. Anything else that you guys wanted to rehash or recall? I think I got most.
How interesting, Tulio and Steve, when you think about relatability, it really ties back to vulnerability. When you're vulnerable, you'll realize how relatable you are to the people around you. And I think we kind of negate that when we're trying to be someone else that we're not. So vulnerability, authenticity, being yourself, you realize that we're more alike than we think we are.
Yeah. So, vulnerability can equal relatability, right?
Exactly.
All right. On the next show, we're going to talk about something that I think more and more command and control CEOs are learning. It's a little mysterious to them. It's called the thing called feeling and empathy, right? So if you know someone out there who could use a listen, we're going to dive into the importance of empathetic leadership. Is empathy a critical blind spot in your leadership style and corporate strategy? Lots of research out there says that tuning in to our next show could directly impact your bottom line. So on the next episode of the Bliss Business Podcast, that's what we're going to get into. Thank you, everyone.